There's no going
So you
back.
can do what you wanna do. You can do what you wanna do.
Hello artists, this is Dalene FM and this is day 23 of our 365 day epic journey where we're giving an art lesson a day every day for 365 days. Today we're going to be talking about value and color. Now I've grouped those two together because they really do well hand in hand. This is a part of our series on the fundamentals of art, specifically the elements of art at the moment. We're going through the first 7 elements, which is effectively your ingredients to create an artwork. Now what you're looking at here is our trusty little apple that we were using yesterday, and we're going to have a look at the value, what actually is value. So effectively value is the lightness or the darkness of the color or the lack of color, whichever way you're looking at it. Now in the case of value, we specifically you would be drawing in something like a pencil or a charcoal, something that lacks color. So it would be effectively a black and white. If we're talking about pure value, we're effectively talking about black and white. Now the reason value is important is because value communicates to us, the viewer, the intensity of light that is falling on your subject. So in your highlighted areas where you've got very strong highlights or a lot of light, let me just make my pen a bit smaller here. Like here for example, you've got a strong highlight there and there. That will show you where you've got nice strong reflections. Here you've got very low values or little reflection happening, so it's quite dark. So effectively your value scale is your scale from 0 reflection right up along the scale to full reflection here. So it's effectively from deepest black to whitest white. Now what I've actually got here in terms of the apple is I'm showing it to you in color so that you can actually see the difference. The first one is the full color one where we've got full intensity. The second one here is where I've just converted it to a black and white image. On the third one, however, what I've done here is I've slightly increased the contrast between the dark and the light. I think sometimes as artists it's good for us to increase our contrast, just to make for a better drawing. So the darkest areas I've made slightly darker and the lightest areas I've made slightly lighter, so the scale of dark to light is increased. On the fourth one here, what I've done here is I've actually broken it up into specific, it's a tool called posturization. I've broken it up into specific solid areas of color, so we can see there's one which is our complete highlight. We've got 2, 3, 4, 5 values of color there, or lack of color, 5 values of gray there. On the last one here, I've slightly increased it. I've actually got 6 values. So we're going from value 1, which is your deepest, your strongest highlights, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So by adding more stages or more steps of value, you can actually get more definition. Now when we come back here to the second one, we can see there's almost an infinite range of values ranging from your highest and to your lowest values, and hundreds of different degrees of gray in between. Value gives us the illusion of form, alright, like we were talking yesterday when we talked about the difference between shape and form. Form is the 3-dimensional space that this object will take up, and that is communicated to us by creating the illusion of form by way of value. So it's the intensity of the black in this case that we're talking about. As I'm sure you'll understand, if you're in a room and you switch the light off if it's dark, you will see nothing, because what communicates value to our eyes is the amount of light that is entering our eye, reflecting off objects. So without light we cannot see value at all. So effectively value is you're drawing light, you're drawing the amount of light that is bouncing off of an object to communicate that object to your brain. It fools our brain into visualizing 3 dimensions. Now a good way to measure value is by drawing one of these for yourself, a value scale. Now I've gone and and drawn 8 values here. A good one is at least 7 values. You want at least 7 values where your top one is 100% black, your lowest one is 0% black or 100% white, whichever way you look at it. And then in the middle you want at least a 50%. Now I've got 8 here, I should have drawn 7, apologies for that, but you want at least 7, and then of course you've got various degrees in between. If you're new at art, this is quite important, but as you become more and more practiced at drawing, this eventually becomes second nature. So this is one thing that I actually have to tell you about everything that I teach you. You learn the theory and then forget about it. Understand what it is that you're talking about. These fundamentals are particularly true. That is particularly true for these fundamentals of art. Learn the theory and then forget about it. Once you've understood them, I don't want you to dwell too much on them, because by dwelling on them, you're going to get so caught up in the theory that you end up losing creativity. So for everything that I'm teaching you in this lesson today, please understand them and then literally just forget about it. Okay, so now we're going to go down to an exercise where we're going to see how light affects what we're looking at. Now we've just got a sphere, a ball so to speak, here on our page, and we've got a little picture of a light so we can see where the light source is. As you can see, this is where the light is hitting the object and it's most intense as the object goes round in shape, so the light gets less and less intense, or the shadow gets more and more intense until we come here to our core shadow. That is our darkest part. Now often when you see a sphere or a three-dimensional object, you'll find down here, for example, we've got a much lighter value than what we've got up here. It gets from light, it goes dark, and then it goes light again. And the reason for this is because we've got reflected light bouncing off the surface. So if we didn't have this sitting on a surface, this here, this lighter area around the bottom, wouldn't be quite as intense. The shape of our sphere is then further intensified by the fact that it's sitting on a surface and we've got a shadow here that tells us the surface that the sphere is sitting on. Now if your sphere didn't have a shadow, it would appear to be floating in the middle of space. So your shadow grounds it and it gives it context. And this will be the same for any shape. We use a sphere because it's the easiest to explain this, but it's the same for any object, any subject that you're drawing. You're going to look for your strongest highlights, your strongest lowlights, and the shadows that your object is throwing either on the surface that it's sitting on or on the surrounding objects around it. And then you're going to look for reflected light. So we've got, one is your highlights, 2 is your lowlights, and obviously the degrees in between from 1 to 2. The third thing that you're going to look for is the shadows that it is casting, either onto the surface it's sitting on or to the object around it. And the fourth thing that you're going to look for is reflected light. The shape and the curvature of your highlights and your shadows is what's going to help to describe the nature of the object that you're looking at. I just want to quickly, before I go on to color, I just want to point out to you the difference between value and color. If you take a color scale, what I've got at the top here is a graduation of various different colors of the rainbow, and you just convert it to black and white, this is the result that you get at the bottom here. It doesn't match the color at the top. You'll see that, for example, the difference between the red and the yellow on the grayscale one is almost indistinguishable. You get a slightly different value here when you start coming to your green, and the reason for this is because color and value is not the same thing. You'll see that, you'll notice here with the yellow and the red that the value is very similar, and you can see that when you start taking down the color and going more towards grayscale. And that's one of the reasons why, as artists, if we were drawing this, we could actually invent a slightly darker area to help to create the illusion, and that takes us back to our apple over there, where we can intensify the lightness and the darkness, because this is what it would, this number 2 here is what it would look like if it was just straight conversion. Number 3 is what we would do as an artist, where we would slightly increase or decrease the values to intensify areas. So to recap, value is almost entirely simply the difference between your brightest highlights and your deepest shadows and the various graduations in between, ignoring color, looking simply at the light that object is reflecting back at your eye. It's just one more note I want to share on value, and that is the difference between tinting and shading. Now, tinting is when you increase the lightness of an area. So when you're going more towards white, we're talking about tints. When you're going more towards the darker end, we're talking about shade. Let's have a look at color. Now, color is tints taken one step further. The first thing that we'll do is we'll just have a look at the color wheel. That will just help you to understand color if you don't know it yet. This is relatively easy to understand. We start off with our primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Can't see the blue on blue there, but I've just written blue on blue. Those are our three primary colors. The easiest way to understand it is simply, if you mix equal parts of red and yellow, you're going to get a secondary color, which will be the orange. Equal parts of yellow and blue will give you green. And equal parts of red and blue are going to give you purple. All right. So those are your secondary colors. So we'll start off with our red, yellow, and blue. Our red, yellow, and blue, sorry, are our primary colors. Then our secondary colors is the orange, purple, and green. So secondary colors are secondary. Excuse me. Our secondary colors are our primary colors mixed 50-50 to become secondary colors. And then we do the same thing where we mix primary and secondary colors in equal parts to get tertiary colors. Alright, so we'll take 50% of, say, orange and red is going to give us a red-orange. And so we go. 50% of our secondary with our primary is going to give us our tertiary. And it goes around the color wheel like that. We end up with 12 colors. The typical color wheel is 12 colors, and then you can break it down even further. You can join each color there and get, you know, the next layer of colors, and you can end up with an infinite amount of colors. The next thing we're going to look at is how we can use color in art. Now, this part is hugely theory, all right, and this is the typical part where I want you to know it, learn it, and then forget about it. As artists, we want color to become more of an instinctive thing. We don't want to dwell too much on the academic side of it, because we don't want to, in my opinion, we don't want to break away from creativity. And if you dwell too much on this, it's going to affect your creativity. So again, let's learn this and then understand it, so you've got it to fall back on if you need it, but effectively rely more on your instincts than on your color theory. Colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel are called complementary colors. Now, what's nice about complementary colors is that you can use complementary colors because they complement one another. So if you, for example, painting a tree with lots of green leaves, you can add little flecks, almost imperceptible little flecks of red into the green, and it helps the green to be more intense, so that as you're viewing it, your eye picks up the green, doesn't see necessarily the red, but the green just looks that much richer because of the presence of the red. We'll move across to analogous colors. Now, analogous colors are 3 to 5 colors that sit next to one another in the color wheel. Now, the nice thing about analogous colors is that it helps to promote unity in your artwork. So if you, again, painting a tree with lots of green leaves, and you add slightly lighter green in this case, and then a little bit of blue on the other side, it's going to help to create an atmospheric, the colors will be less intense. So it would be, for example, light shining through an early morning break, in the clouds where colors are quite muted. You can use analogous colors to communicate that. Triadic colors are 3 colors at equal distances around the color wheel. That's also really nice to use in your art, because the purple and the orange in this case here are actually going to be split values of the red. So it gets a very similar response to the viewer than what complementary colors do, but you're taking it one step further. And instead of using red on its own, you're splitting it into the orange and the purple. So you can start getting a lot more dynamic value to the color that you're trying to create in your artwork. Split complementary colors has almost exactly the same effect as what triadic colors were if you use them in that respect, except you're going one step closer to your original primary color there by using colors that are on either side of the primary color instead of at equal distances around the color wheel. So if your main color is green, you're going to use, you identify your complementary color, which is red, and then you go on either side of that, which is the violet and the red orange. So instead of using red, you will use your violet and your red orange, and you will create a very similar effect, but it's a little bit between complementary and triadic color values. So it'll be a little bit less intense in complementary, but a little bit more intense in triadic, your resulting artwork from that. Now, tetradic. Tetradic is one of those ones that I honestly, and this is, it might be just me, but I mean, who cares? What difference is it going to make at the end of the day? But effectively, triadic colors, tetradic colors are colors that are one color apart and then at opposite ends of the color wheel. So you could use, if green was your main color, you could go 2 colors away and choose that blue, and then the 2 colors opposite, and then instead of using these light values here in the triadic and the split complementary, you can use these 3 here for your triadic values. My advice to you would be know this and then ignore it. Just totally ignore it and go by instinct. Your instinct as an artist is going to be far more valuable to you than what I'm teaching you here. It's good to know, but please don't let this become a religion. Alright, now we're going to go down to tints and shades, tints being lighter and shade being darker. Now what we're having a look there at that level, these are our colors that resulted from our color wheel, primary colors down to secondary colors, down to tertiary colors, and there you're adding white to get lighter tints, and there you're adding dark to get darker tints. Gamut meaning the full range of colors that you are able to see or create from those colors on the color wheel. So effectively, strictly speaking, all you need is red, green, blue, black, and white. Those are your absolutely essential colors. Any color that you buy in a tube other than those 5 colors is color that you can make up, colors that are within gamut range. Now, if you have a look at the video that I did a little while ago on colors, there are some colors that are not in this range of gamut. For example, your very intense magenta pinks. You do have a area of colors here which comes close to it but does not quite match that. So there are some tubes of paint that you can buy that are outside of this gamut, but anything that is within this gamut, you don't need to buy it. You can make them up. Buying them in the tube just makes it easier for us, I suppose. We can just squeeze it out. But in the case of possibly trying to save a bit of money and you know, you've got a tight budget, then by all means, this color wheel is lovely to use. It's good to know how to mix a color that you don't have. What you need to do when you're working with a color wheel is you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. When you're trying to match a color, you're going to ask yourself, does it need more red or does it need more blue? Effectively, those are the 2 main questions that you're going to ask yourself. If I add more red to this, is it going to get closer to the color that I want? If I add more blue to this, is it going to get closer to the color that I want? You can ask yourself the same thing about yellow, but generally speaking, yellow is your least effective color on your color wheel. It's got the least influence. So red and blue have got the most influence. So those are going to be the colors that you will most need to adjust the hue of a color. Okay, I'm going to come down here to some terminology. I want to describe to you the difference between hue, chroma, and value. Now, hue is literally just that color. It's whether or not, you know, it's the difference between red, orange, yellow, etc. So that is the name of a color, is hue. Oh, look at me. Name of a color. Okay. Chroma is the intensity of a color. So it is, if you were taking a color through to grayscale, this is what I've described at the top here. your red would be your most intense color, and your gray would be your least intense color. It is the increase or reduction of color between gray and the full color value of the color it is that you're looking at. Not to be confused with value. Value is the lightness or darkness of that color. So there, your red there would be equivalent to your red here. So on chroma, your full red or the full value of your color is on the extreme intense end of the scale. Gray being, or some version of gray being on the opposite end of the scale. Value, however, your intense color, your full color, is in the middle of the scale. There we tint it down by adding white, or we shade it up by adding black. Okay, does it make sense? It's quite important to understand the difference between value and chroma. So here we can see in our apple where we've got, I've reduced the levels of saturation going down so you can see them. This is our full value. It's our fully intense apple, where our colors are as intense as what we need them to be. You've now got less chroma as you're going more towards the gray. You've still got a lot of color in there, but it's less intense. Here you've got very little color, quite a lot of gray. It's getting even more down on the gray end of the chroma scale. And then, of course, there we are, completely grayscale. So that is your most intense, and that is your least intense. The colors of the rainbow, if you did science at school, you would know that the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Those are the colors that light consists of. If you split light through a prism, those are the 7 colors that you get. If you're looking at an object like an apple that is red, the reason your eye sees that is red is because that full range of color from sunlight is hitting the surface of that apple, and every other color except red is being absorbed. Red is then being reflected back off the surface of the apple and into your eye, and that's why you're seeing the red, because you're not seeing any of the other colors. So in the case of the leaves, the green is being reflected back, all the other colors are being absorbed. In the case of black, all the colors are being absorbed, none of them are being reflected back into your eye. In the case of white, they're all being reflected back into your eye, none of them are being absorbed. So let's just go back up to the color wheel for a minute, because I want to discuss with you the difference between light colors. I want to discuss with you the difference between warm colors and cool colors. Now, cool colors are known as such because they are colors that we typically associate with something cold, as opposed to fiery hot, which is on the red end and the yellow end of the scale. So the colors sort of from there, roughly, because there's no obvious boundary between cold and hot colors, but that end of your color wheel is going to be your warm end or your hot end, and this end of your color wheel is going to be your cold side. But now let's talk about color bias. The bias of a color is that color's tendency to lean towards one or other end of the temperature scale. So we could say, for example, this violet purple, is that a cold color or is that a hot color? Well, let's break it down. It is closer to the warm end of the scale, red being, of course, the hottest part of our color wheel. So it is closer to the warm end, so we could arguably say that that is a warm color, but it has a cool color bias. In other words, it is on the cooler side of the red, so it is leaning towards the blue. Effectively, the difference between red and violet is that the violet contains a little bit more blue in it. So it is leaning towards the blue end of the scale, so it is cooling down. The same can be said here for the green. It is on the cooler end of the scale compared to the yellow, so it is yellow with a cool color bias. So color bias is the tendency of a color to lean towards a temperature. It either leans towards hot, or it leans towards cold, or it is hot, or it is cold. So artists, that was color and value, probably the most academic of our fundamentals of art, of the 7 elements of art particularly. But it's good to know, and it will certainly help you to understand a lot more as we go further into it. Artists, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, lesson 23. If you have, please like and share, and send it around the internet, and invite your friends to come and like our page and take this journey with us. I really want to thank you once again so much for being a part of this journey with me, and I wish you all the best of luck with your artwork. And please remember that if you've got any questions, particularly about something like this that is quite an academic look at value and color, if you've got any questions, please pop it into the question bar. I'm going to add these little notes that I've made here. I will add them like I did yesterday, as effectively as course notes for you to download as you need them, so that you can refer back to them. And please, yes, ask your questions. I will be happy to help. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.
That's what you want to do.